Where do I do the switching up?
All right, Tom, it's all yours.
Great. Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted you're here for this next chapter in our Episcopal 101 series. Last week, we talked about the overall structure of the Episcopal Church and its connection to the wider Anglican communion. This session is a little bit like the civics course that you had in high school. It's related to how the Episcopal Church actually gets its work done, how it organizes itself, how it makes decisions. And you'll see as we go along that there is a certain kind of consistency in the way that this decision making happens, whether it's at the parish level, the diocesan level, or at the national level. And it relates really to our history as a denomination. And you remember we chatted about the history now some months ago, before COVID shut everything down, that the Episcopal Church arose out of the American Revolution and distinguishing this country from the British Empire and distinguishing our church from the Church of England. And part of what you'll see is the way that that was organized and codified into church law. So that's just sort of an overview. Also, I want to acknowledge, as you see on the screen, that the presentation I'm doing was actually put together by our Chancellor, Michael Glass. This is a kind of a workshop that he offers to vestry folks, particularly senior and junior wardens and other folks who attend his annual kind of orientation. All right, so let's begin here. How do we organize ourselves? So there are three basic ways that churches typically organize their life. There are Episcopal style churches, ours would be one, where there are bishops and dioceses, and it's a kind of a hierarchical structure. There are congregational churches. The United Church of Christ would be an example, where the operating sort of organizing principle is the congregation itself. It sort of runs itself, it makes decisions about its life and its ministry. And there's Presbyterial, that is like the Presbyterian church that has elders, but no priests and no bishops. Henny can comment on that as we talk about that a little bit more, because she comes out of that tradition, both formerly in the Presbyterian church and before that in the Reformed church, which also comes out of that particular organizing principle. So those three, Episcopal, Congregational, Presbyterial, are the most typical way that Christian churches, regardless of where they are in the world or what they call themselves, organize themselves and do their ministry and their work. Any question about those three? Okay. So the Episcopal churches, we are one, obviously, from our name, and the word Episcopal comes from the Greek word episkopos, which means bishop. So Episcopal type churches would include the Roman Catholic Church, the Episcopal Church, the Orthodox churches, Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Serbian Orthodox, etc., and the other Anglican churches. Authority is vested in the bishops who make decisions about doctrine, all right? And the foundation of the authority of the bishop is that hands have been laid on him by other bishops. He's been invested and ordained as a bishop for that ministry. And there is a tradition within the Episcopal type churches called apostolic succession, which means that every bishop is being part of a chain, an unbroken chain that goes all the way back to the apostles. And that's the origin of their authority. Bishops are the chief ministers who then ordain other ministers, priests and deacons. So last November when I was ordained, it was Bishop David who ordained me. If you look in the New Testament, you can find references to deacons and to bishops and to priests ultimately. Congregational churches. So the most obvious one would be the United Church of Christ. Sometimes they're called Congregational Church. Sometimes they go by a name, like in Modesto it used to be called College Avenue Congregational Church. Some Baptist churches are also organized that way. In a congregational church, the congregation decides its doctrine and its positions. Congregations can be part of larger associations, but they are really responsible at the congregational level for hiring ministers, firing ministers, and in general, responsible financially for themselves as well. Congregationalism as a model arose out of and after the Reformation. And then the Presbyterial churches, particularly the Presbyterian Church, there are no bishops, but congregations are organized into regional presbyteries and larger entities called synods. Each elected church officials, lay and ordained, make the major decisions about the congregation, all right? And they have, analogous to our General Convention, something called the General Assembly, which brings together all the representatives of the synods around the United States to make decisions for the denomination as a whole. Henny, do you want to add anything from your Presbyterian experience?
Not at the moment. Everything looks good.
Okay, very good. One of the things to know about Presbyterians, they say this often, is that they do things decently and in good order. If you go to a Presbyterian meeting, no matter whether it's at the parish level or General Convention, you will know Robert's Rules of Order. They're very attentive to those patterns of making decisions. So of course, a natural question is which is the right one? Which is the correct way of doing it? And it's a little bit like asking, which of the four gospels is the right gospel? Each one is a little bit different, but which one's the right one? There isn't a right one. That's why we have four of them. There is no, when Jesus was ministering and teaching, he never wrote a letter. He didn't write a book. He didn't leave us with a code of conduct or a constitution for the Jesus movement. So it was left to the disciples and their followers to kind of create a pattern of organizing church life over time. And you can find examples of all three of the models we just talked about in the New Testament. So there isn't a single model that was the right one. All right. Any question about that? Okay. So the Episcopal Church is Episcopal in our name, but it also has Presbyterial forms as well. And this really goes back to our roots as an expression in some ways of the American Revolution. So those who were of the Anglican persuasion and also wanted to continue to be a part of this new country, the United States of America, borrowed some of the values of the revolution, and particularly the idea that they were not going to be subject solely to the kind of monarchical authority of anyone, whether it was the King of England or whether it was a bishop. So the structure of the Episcopal Church is kind of a combination of that Episcopal authority that you could find in the Anglican Church, you could find in the Roman Catholic Church, but also a sense of the authority of the rest of the church, particularly lay people in the church and other clergy for that matter. So the decision in the early part of the formation of the Episcopal Church, kind of crystallizing in 1789, was a church that was both kind of Presbyterial and Episcopal in structure. So foundational to this is the idea, you could say, Martin Luther used to talk about this, the priesthood of all believers, that we as baptized people, that's the fundamental authority for presence and voice and participation in the church. The Holy Spirit is active in everyone's life. Everyone has a voice. Everyone has gifts to give. True for everybody, clergy and lay, bishops and deacons and priests. It's everyone, all right? So our governance, our polity, and that's what we're talking about, is the polity, the way that we organize ourselves, reflects that belief. So the authority of church bodies and leaders is defined by the governing documents of the church. And especially important are, we have elected representatives that make the rules. The rules are available to all, so we can always see what the rules are. And everybody's answerable to those rules. All clergy and laity are obligated to follow the rules. Nobody is above the rules. All right, does that make sense? Okay.
Yes.
So authority also sits in the pews, right? So the Episcopal Church is a representative democracy. It's another expression of our roots kind of arising out of the American Revolution. We delegate our authority to others through election of representatives. We see that at the parish level in terms of creating a vestry and nominating our representatives to diocesan convention. At diocesan convention, we elect people who represent us at general convention. Those people who are elected make decisions on our behalf, just like when we elect somebody to the House of Representatives, we expect them to do that. We always have the choice to continue to elect them or to elect somebody else. And the last line is really important because it makes us different from most other Anglican communion members. This is in some ways a radical shift from the way that the Anglican Church typically organized itself, and it makes us somewhat inscrutable to those Anglican communions in other parts of the world, especially in Africa, who do not function that way and who still operate in a kind of a monarchical structure where the bishops really have all the authority. So, as I've already mentioned in some ways, I mean, this structure should sound familiar because, of course, many of the same people who were responsible for organizing the Episcopal Church were also responsible for writing the Constitution. So that dioceses have some independence, somewhat like states. General Convention has two houses like Congress. Leaders are elected. Authority and power are shared to provide checks and balances. Very, very similar to what we know from our civics class back in high school. So, authority is shared between clergy and lay. In the parish, you've got the parish meeting, vestries, wardens, and clergy. In the diocese, there's the bishop, and there's a standing committee, there's convention, commissions, committees, the deputation. And if you're not familiar with that last word, the deputation means the people that are elected at diocesan convention that go to the general convention on our behalf, all right? And then in the national church, there's the general convention that happens every 3 years, the presiding bishop, and then national commissions and committees. The way issues come to the church is arising out of the pews, out of individual congregations. And it's because of our decision-making process that we have been, you might say, more progressive than some other parts of the Anglican Church, because in some ways, because we are a representative enterprise, cultural shifts that are reflected in the general population can be manifested in church life more quickly because it comes out of what's happening in the life of lay people and local churches. So questions like, why should women not serve as clergy or as a warden or as a member of a vestry? These were all questions that arose, and the church made decisions about that made considerable difference in the ways that the church governance happened. Why can't people of different colors worship together? Why can't people of different sexual orientations be ordained? Why does our common prayer still speak to our community as it did 50 years ago? So meaning, and we talked about this when Father Peter was doing the Book of Common Prayer, every few decades, there's an effort to revise the Book of Common Prayer to more fully represent the life and religious experience of the church. And that is one of the huge questions that's going to be coming up at the next, and probably the next 2 or 3 general conventions. So as I've said already, this doesn't work like this everywhere. Through most of the Anglican Communion, bishops make the decisions and hand them down. There's nothing like the House of Deputies or the Standing Committee, and there are no lay people in diocesan leadership. So you can see the experience that we have here in the United States is very different from certainly what it would be like in England, what it would be like in South Africa or Kenya or in India, other places that follow that more traditional model. In Canada, New Zealand, Australia, a few others, it's more like what it is in the United States. And, we were organized this way 100 years before the idea of the Anglican Communion began. Okay, so now we're going to go into the actual governance, the kind of structure of the way that we organize ourselves. Before I go into that, any questions, comments about what we've talked about so far?
Tom, I'd like to make a comment in that a good example of the laity having important voice happened in recent months with the working group and the deciding on the steps to coming back to in-person.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, go ahead.
Because I was on a working group with the bishop involved, and the bishop and the canon of the ordinary, 2 of the ordained staff in the diocese. And so, and we had a non-ordained person on the committee, but it was pretty much ordained folk making the decisions, but informed, and we fleshed it out over a few weeks. And as you say, there were probably some other dioceses where it could have just been come down to the bishop says, this is what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. But instead, the bishop had to go through a couple of committees. I can't remember the one, I always forget it, but one was the standing committee, yes. Elected members from this diocese who've been elected to serve, and had to go through them, and they made changes. And, and it wasn't, we who worked on the original document weren't allowed to approve any changes. These lay people got to have that say, and appropriately so. And so it really does show a shared leadership. It's not as what's the word I'm looking for?
Dictatorial.
Thank you. But that's it. That's what I wanted to say.
Sure. No, that's a great example. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so now we really get into the civics part of this conversation. So we chatted a little bit about this last time. Episcopal Church itself, about 2 million members, about 300 bishops, about 6,700 clergy in 17, now 18 different countries, 109 or so dioceses, 7,000 congregations. So this is a big, international, complex enterprise, right? So here's the essential structure. 3 levels. General Convention at the top. General Convention is like Congress for the Episcopal Church. It's where the decisions are made about our laws, about approving resolutions. It's the chief decision-making body. It's where the highest authority resides in the Episcopal Church. The next level is the diocese. You're more familiar with that, where we live here in the Episcopal Diocese of San Joaquin. And then the local expression of this are the parishes or missions like St. John's in Stockton, or institutions. We don't have many institutions here. Maybe the School for Deacons in Fresno could be considered an institution, but other places have